In 2003, in the third largest province in China, the state-run, city-run zoo had to close down temporarily. Here's what happened. A mom and her little child were in the African Plains area getting a good look at the lion, and the little boy started to roar. And if you have little children, you go to the zoo, you know what that's like. You want to get the lion to roar, so what do? You roar. That's not what I do. I know there's something in between me and the lion, but I'm not going to get him roaring at me. He paces back and forth looking at me thinking, that's food right there. I'm not going to get him roaring. So the little boy, though, he wanted the lion to roar. So he is just roaring and roaring, and the lion is just sitting there, nothing. Finally, the lion opened its mouth and started barking. The mom and the boy, they're like, what? And they called over other people. Listen to this lion, it's barking. And so other people came along. They got zookeepers there. What's going on with this? By the time the reporters got there, they had to fess up. And the zookeeper said, yeah, that is actually a mastiff, a large dog. It's not a lion, and we're sorry about this. But and the chief of the animals actually came out to the reporter and said, we really do have a lion. We do. He's at a breeding facility. This is an employee's dog. We just know that people come to a zoo expecting to see a lion, so we had to have a lion in that territory. That's crazy, right? So I'm thinking, all right, what kind of mastiff actually looks like a lion? A large dog, that's a large dog, right? A Tibetan mastiff actually looks you got to use your imagination. So here's a picture of it, all right? You got to cut the hair just the right way, and they did. They cut it and styled and everything. They were really committed to this. They were going to have a lion in their cage. But you don't even have to get that kind of mastiff. You just get any dog and go to Amazon and get yourself a mane for your dog. So you can have your lion if you want it. Here's one for a Chihuahua. Now that's funny. But you know what is not funny is when we believe that we are good, that we even follow Jesus, and yet when we start talking, our words don't sound good. They sound cutting, they sound sarcastic, they sound critical, they sound like complaints. Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? And if he's the Lion of the tribe of Judah, as followers of Jesus, we should roar. And yet, we stub our toes, someone cuts us off, someone does us wrong. What do? We start barking, and oftentimes those barks are complaints. And we start yapping at our kids, even though we're supposed to be building them up. And we're supposed to be there for our spouse to encourage them. And what are we doing? We're barking insults at them. And why didn't you do that? You always do that. You never do this. We have an issue that sounds a whole lot like barking rather than roaring with the confidence, with the courage of the lion we're supposed to have. Now, I want to just be right up front with you because as a teenager, I had a golden retriever named Ginger. Wonderful dog, beautiful dog, loved that dog. So I'm not down on dogs. Maybe Chihuahuas, but not most dogs. I love dogs. Here's the deal, though. In the early century, when Jesus walked this earth, dogs were considered not pets, but scavengers. They were the ones that went through the streets and were garbage collectors. They ate whatever was in the streets, and sometimes that's like stuff you would not feed dogs, and they were eating it. If you can imagine what might flow through the streets of a small town, the dogs were scavenging that stuff. So people stayed away from them. While the lion represents everything regal, and by the way, just in case you get confused by the terminology of the lion or the symbolism of the lion, our enemy is called a roaring lion, roaming, seeking who he may devour. He often masquerades as an angel of light, doesn't he? He is the prince of darkness and of lies. And so if Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, of course he's going to present himself as just as good a lion, right? Lion, though, represents regalness. And yet dogs, in that century at least, represented everything mangy, like the things that sometimes come out of our mouth. You ever surprised by what comes out of your mouth? You ever just taken back by it? I said that? Maybe it's not things you actually say, but the fact that you laugh along with that dirty joke. You just agreed with it, right? You ever surprised by what comes out of your mouth? You're supposed to roar like Jesus, aren't you? So our question this morning is, how do we learn to roar again? How do we get that roar back? Because we so desperately need it, don't we? So we're going through this series, and we had to actually jump forward in our series as we go through the book of Luke to the cross and the resurrection, because it was Easter last weekend. But now we are back to where we left off, and we're at the time where Jesus gives, in Luke, his most famous sermon called the Sermon on the Plain. Now, maybe you've heard of the Sermon on the Mount, because Jesus actually preached on a mount, the Sermon on the Mount. This is the Sermon on the Plain because he preached at 20,000 miles above no, he didn't actually. He wasn't in a plane. He was actually on a plane. He was on a plane preaching, and everybody was listening to him. This sermon, by the way, sounds very much like the Sermon on the Mount, and you'll see some of the similarities. There's enough differences, and obviously the location of a plane versus a mount, to know that these are two separate messages, but there's a lot of similarities, so you might hear that in this. Here's what I want us to do. In order to see what Jesus wants us to see, and there's a lot in this, so we can't cover everything, but in order for us to see at least this big concept in there about being generous with your words, we need to see a big picture. What happens is, and you know this, if you do a Bible study, you'll pick a verse, and you'll really study that verse, and you'll find other verses to support that verse and to show that that's really what God is saying. Sometimes, though, when you take a verse and you just study that verse, you find that in that verse, it's not really sharing the big picture. You're not seeing the context of what you're supposed to see. And if we're going to look at Jesus' Sermon on the Plain, we're going to have to see everything that's around it. That's why in your bulletins you'll see that I've got a pretty good chunk of it, not all of it, but a pretty good chunk in there. And I need you to pull it out because we need to actually do a little work on it. For you to get what Jesus is saying, you need to see it in context. In order to see it in context, because it seems like some of it is a little bit confusing, I pray that this will all get cleared up as you mark up the text. If you notice in the very middle of that, I have lines for you. There's actual extra space. I double-spaced in the very center section because I want you to mark that up. So take out your pen. I'd really like you to mark it up with highlighter, but I don't think you got the memo. You don't have highlighters with you, right? So we're going to just be creative, and I'm going to have you mark it up with different symbols, starting with the basic underline. Don't underline anything yet. I'll show you how to mark it up as we go. So we're in that middle section. Here we go. First part, but I tell you who hear me, he often says this. Hey, I'm speaking to those who are willing to lean in a little bit, do a little bit of work, try to figure out what I'm saying. We're going to do that. We're going to try to lean in. We're going to try to do a little bit of work. We're going to try to figure out what he's saying. So I hope you're with me. I hope you're hearing. I hope you have something to write with and you're ready to underline. This is going to help you understand this better. The first thing you're going to do is an underline. Here it is. Love your enemies. Just underline that. Love your enemies. Now, if you've got that underlined, that's easy to do. The hard part to do is actually do it. Well, it's easy to love people that you really, really, really like. Sometimes it's not so easy to love people you really, really like, right? It's kind of an on or off thing. But to love your enemies, that's like next to impossible. Before I share with you why he says that, we have to keep going. We have to see this in context. Love your enemies. All right, now we need something different than an underline, and you don't get to choose. I get to choose. Otherwise, there'd be mass chaos in the room. Here we go. I'm going to just say brackets. Brackets are easy, so just put a bracket at the beginning. Do good to those who hate you. Now, don't end the bracket. The line keeps going. So do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. Then you can end bracket. That whole thing gets bracketed. So he says, I want you to love your enemies. And I don't want you just to love your enemies. I want you to do something about it. I want you to do something for them. I want you to take action upon this love of your enemies. But he's not done. He's not done. We've got another symbol to write. We got to have something totally different, and I like squiggly lines. So you like squiggly lines? I knew you did. Here we go. Squiggly lines. If someone strikes you on the cheek, do not stop him from taking your tunic. One of my strikes you on your teeth. I'm not even reading that. Let me stand right here. That was weird. I've never had that. Okay. Little bit of jet lag. All right. If someone strikes, I still want to say strikes. Is that the line before? Let's back up. Yes, thank you. All right. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. All right. Squiggly lines make total sense now to you, right? I'm just so foggy. Here we go. Squiggly lines. Do squiggly lines under it. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. All right, here we go. Next, there's more squigglies. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. There's a key word right there, give. So here's what Jesus has said so far. We got more to doodle on, but here's what he said so far. I want you to love your enemy. Those that you don't like, they don't like you. I want you to love them. I don't want you just to say, I love them, and then ignore them. I want you to do something. And it's going to be something hard. It's not going to be easy. But he goes further and he says, not only do I want you to do something, I want you to give something of yours to them. Oh, man, that hurts more than anything, doesn't it? Okay, I have this struggle with the love thing, but who would ever know if I did love or I didn't? We can all fake that, right? Yeah, I can be nice to you kind of thing. No. I want you to do something to show it. Not only that, I want you to really do something by giving them something of yours. Ouch. Love, do, give. That's the pattern he lays down. And it's crazy. Now, earlier this week, because I knew I was going out of town, I read my message to my family and wanted them to critique me. Not really, I didn't want them to critique me. I really wanted them to say, that's awesome, Dad. That is the coolest message ever. So I could go on my trip and not worry about it. But as I'm reading this, Caden stops me. He interrupts me. He says, whoa, Dad, are you serious? I'm like, I didn't write this. This is Jesus. He says, if someone takes what belongs to me, so let's say that a kid comes up to my desk and grabs my pencil and walks away. I'm not supposed to go get my pencil. I'm not supposed to go to the teacher and say, he took my pencil. That's wrong. Dad, are you sure? And I did what every good dad does when challenged by your son in something that is high and theological. I said, let's move on, son. So, let's move on. I actually will come back to this, and I did come back, but not in that moment. So, we're going to go on, but here's what we're going to do. He's going to repeat himself. That's why I'm having you mark this up so you can see the repeat. So, he's going to say it again because it's that important. You got, what was the first thing we did? It was a underline. Here we go. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. So I want you to love people you don't like, people who have wronged you, people who have mistreated you, people who have rooted in their lifetime for Duke University. I want you to love them. That's hard. That's hard. He wants you to actually do that. And so we go on. What's our second one? It's brackets. So, bracket the first part. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. End bracket. So he's got that pattern. I want you to love. I want you to do. Now he's going to continue the pattern. And if you lend to those, well, lending, that's giving, so we got to do our squiggly lines. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. So there we have it. All of that is squiggly line. So again, he's got that same pattern going. I want you to love. I want you to do. I want you to give. And when anything is said twice, you really have to lean forward and pay attention because it's important. This is true in any Hebrew literature that is written or spoken, and especially when Jesus says it. In fact, remember, he says things like, verily, verily, or truly, truly, I say to you. That means lean forward, lean in, pay attention. This is important. Of course, if somebody says it 3 times, and it does happen, holy, 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 right? It does happen 3 times. If someone says it 3 times, I mean, that is like the most important. You cannot ignore that, but that's very rare, so don't expect that to show up very often. Oh, but expect it to show up on your page today, because we're ready to go 3 times. Here we go. Ready for the 3rd time? We got an underline. But love your enemies. We got brackets. Do good to them. And we got squiggly lines. And lend to them without expecting to get anything back. So there you have it, 3 times. This has got to be so important to Jesus to say it 3 times. So why? Why does he emphasize this and make such a big deal out of it? He wants us to see something, doesn't he? He wants us to understand the relationship between what happens in here and what shows up out here. That to love is not enough, and to do is not enough. But to combine the two together and recognize that what you do comes from how you love. That the two are connected to one another, and ultimately that your expression of giving is going to flow out of, your generosity is going to flow out of your attitude towards people. And so if you're struggling with your own generosity, it's because you actually are struggling not with what the hand is unable to do, reach into the pocket or to lend a hand or to help out. It's really what's going on the inside, right? Something's wrong with the love if we're not getting the action to show up. So this is what he's trying to get us to see and trying to get us to recognize. He wants us to see that love is the beginning of the action of loving. That the attitude comes before the behavior. That what's on inside shows up on the outside. So we could actually put it like this: your attitude determines your behavior. Now, we can't dismiss any of this. We can't say, well, your attitude is more important, because can you imagine saying, I love you, I love you, I love you to your spouse and never, ever actually doing anything for them? Never actually speaking kind to them? That'd be crazy. Never actually lifting a finger to help them? That'd be crazy. Your attitude and your behavior have to go together, and Jesus knows that, and he's trying to tie it together. The problem is we focus right here all the time. We focus on behavior all the time. That's where we get in trouble. Because we believe that if we could somehow control our behavior, everything else falls in line. And there's a philosophy out there, fake it till you make it. And I'm sure there's some truth in that, because if you act like a brat, you'll become a brat kind of thing. If you act good, maybe you'll become good. But the deal is, and what Jesus is trying to get us to see is, if you just focus out here, you got a problem on the inside, and what's on the inside will eventually show up on the outside. And so we have to stop saying, all right, how do I control my behavior? How do I control my behavior? I ask the question, how do we get a roar back? You remember that question? That's the question we're trying to answer. It's actually the wrong question. Because what we're saying is, how do we get our roar back? That's behavior. How do we get our words? How do we stop cussing? How do we stop criticizing? How do we stop complaining? How do we stop nagging? How do we get to that place where this thing is working right and saying right and being good like I want to be? And Jesus would say, you're not following my order. What's the order? Love, do, give. If you don't follow my order, you're going to struggle, and you're going to struggle, and you're going to struggle. How would Jesus' half-brother answer the question? Think of James. Think of what James says about how your tongue and how you speak. How would he answer the question, how do I get my roar back? And by roar, we just mean, how do we speak like Jesus? Say the things that Jesus would say, with courage, with conviction, with love, with compassion, with passion itself. How do we get that back? You know what James would say? You probably know the answer if you've read James. It's a great book to read. If you haven't read the Bible lately, read James. Very, very practical. He would tell you, don't even bother. Don't even bother trying to get the tongue tamed, right? Don't even work on it. It's not going to do any good if you do. I'm serious. That's what he said. Forget about it. He uses the animal analogy when he answers the question, how do we get that tongue under control? He says, look, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man. Yeah, you get circus animals. We were one time, for our honeymoon, we were in Key West, and there was this cat trainer. They have all these shows on the boardwalk. The sun is setting. It's a beautiful thing, and contortionists fitting into things. Weird people tricks kind of stuff. And they had this cat trainer. And we were standing there just amazed because, we've had cats, and we know you can't actually teach a cat to do any tricks. And these cats were actually jumping up when he said to jump up, and they were rolling over, and they were begging, and they were doing everything dogs do. And it blew our mind. So he says, look, you can train all kinds of animals. You can train reptiles. I didn't know you could train reptiles. Anybody ever train an iguana? That doesn't seem like, go fetch. That doesn't seem like an iguana trick, but all kinds of reptiles, creatures of the sea, they've been tamed. If you've been to SeaWorld, you have seen Shamu do some amazing things, and yet you can't tame the tongue. They've been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. Forget it, James says. Forget it. Does that mean if I've got a four-letter word problem and they keep spilling out of my mouth, and I can't seem to control it, that I should just take James' advice and say, forget it. It's who I am. I just should spout off whatever's in there. If I yell at my kids, forget it. Just yell at them. You can't control it. If I am argumentative at work, if I'm disrespectful to authority, teachers, boss, whoever, just let it go. It's not a big deal. Well, before you jump to that conclusion, let's ask the question, what does Jesus say about this? What does Jesus say? If you look back on your sheets at the bottom, he actually has an answer. So you did the middle section, you got all kinds of crazy things on there, including squiggly lines. On the bottom section, though, Jesus says, all right, here's the deal. Here's what's really going on. No good tree. Now, he doesn't use the animal analogy. He uses tree and fruit analogy. No good tree bears bad fruit. If you go up to a tree and it's got fruit that has worms in it, or it's starting to blacken and getting moldy or yucky or squishy, something's wrong with the tree, especially if that keeps showing up on the tree. Bug infested, the tree's infested. Something's wrong with the tree. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. So he goes on and says, each tree is recognized by its own fruit. In our backyard growing up, we had a peach tree. In the summertime, we would pick peaches off that just about every day, and we'd bite into it, and they were so juicy and fresh. A peach is just amazing. If you've never had a fresh peach, you got to get past the fuzzy skin thing, but after that, it is awesome. I had never pulled one of those fruits off the tree, bit into it, and said, that is the most amazing peach. I wonder what kind of tree this is. It's a peach tree. We know it's a peach tree because peaches come from it. That's his point. You're not going to get some foreign fruit. You're going to get what's inside that tree. That's what comes. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. That's the analogy. You got good in here, it's going to come up. Don't think of vomit. That's not his analogy. He's thinking of good words. What comes up out of your heart reveals what's actually in there. If somebody opens up and it's like a cesspool coming out, guess what? There's a cesspool in there. That's his second point. And the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. And the bottom line, for out of the overflow of the heart, his mouth speaks. His mouth speaks. That's what comes out. That's what comes out. And so, when we're talking about how do I control this tongue and get it to roar and stop barking, we got to take what James said and what Jesus said together. They don't disagree with each other. Just because James says, you can't control your tongue, why are you even trying to control your tongue? And Jesus is saying, well, I agree with that. I agree with that. Because it's not a tongue issue. Your tongue is just going to say what's in your heart. It's going to come out of your heart. It's what's in your heart. It's not a question of how do I get my roar back. The real question for us is this: how do we change our heart? Because if we don't change our heart, we're just going to keep barking. And you can cut that dog and make that mane look so pretty, just like a lion, but you're not going to ever get that dog to roar. It's not going to happen. What you have to do is you have to actually change out the dog for a lion. You have to take the dog away and put the lion back in. And that's exactly what they did in that province in China. They took the dog out and they put the lion back in. Now, I think they wasted a lot of time there because really all they had to do is put the lion back in and the dog problem would disappear. Of course, they were opting for the more humane approach. But you don't have to be humane with the dog in your heart. You understand your dog is your selfishness? Your dog is, I want it my way. How dare you violate my rights? This is mine. You know, this is selfishness. This is where all the arguments come from. This is where all the strife comes from. This is where all the disagreements come from. Selfishness, because I want my way. I demand my way. I deserve this. Right? Isn't that where our arguments come from? Isn't that where our strife comes from? If we didn't have this thing called ego and selfishness, we'd never have to even worry about it. We'd all get along. But we have this struggle inside, and it's an old dog, and it needs to be taken out, and we don't have to be humane about taking it out. In fact, Jesus says to us, I want you to kill off that old man or that old dog. Probably a better analogy, right? That old dog has to go. If what's in your heart is a rabid, barking, fierce dog, then what's going to come out of your mouth is just all that same kind of mangy stuff. It needs to be dealt with. How do you deal with it? Take up your cross daily, deny yourself. Your old self has to die. That dog has to go. It has to go. Plain and simple. Cannot stay. I want to go back to what my son asked, that question about, but Dad, if somebody takes my pencil and runs off with it, it just doesn't seem right that I don't get to tell on him and I don't get to get my pencil back and he just gets to keep my pencil. Here's the deal. Jesus really wasn't concerned about the morality of hypothetical students stealing pencil. Because that's a hypothetical situation. He's throwing a hypothetical situation at us and asking us to deal with it differently than the world deals with it. He's not talking about the morality of the student. The student has to answer for his own issues. We, though, have to answer for how we react to it. And what he's getting at is, I don't want you to be like the rest of the world that's just like, I didn't get my way. How dare you for cutting me off? I'm sorry, that one's on me. That's me. We are supposed to be different. Right? We're not supposed to be like the world. In fact, if you go back to that verse, look at what it actually says. If anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. It's very important. He's not saying, make sure that you take your purse and leave it open and laying on a counter and then leave it for a couple of days and just let people take out of it. No, he's not talking about be irresponsible. Don't leave your car unlocked. Take care of your stuff. But when you are wronged, then you will be wronged. How you respond matters because the world is watching. They want to know if what you really believe in, Jesus Christ is the Lord, He is God, He died for my sins, He has changed me and made me new. They want to know, is that real for you? If that's real for you, then this moment, whether it's the telemarketer, whether it's the credit card company that wronged you, the customer service, I don't know why I'm mentioning all phone conversations, but it seems to be that that's where we get the loudest and the rudest. And you just hope that on their screen it doesn't have your entire profile, like your name and date of birth and where you live and faith, Christian. You just hope it's not there, right, Tim? That's what I'm counting on. They're just a telemarketer. It matters, Jesus says. It matters. He wants us to be different than the world. He wants us to respond the way He responded to us when He looked out at us and saw our sin and our sinful condition and saw that we were people who were lost in our sin. We were rabid dogs barking at the complaints and at the issues and at people and our children, our spouses. We were just that kind of people. He loved us anyway. He didn't just love us. He did something about it. He came down here. He didn't just come down here. He gave Himself away. And if we're ever going to get to that place where we're like Jesus, where we love, we do, we give, we're going to have to get the attitude of the heart right. And that's why this matters. Because it's all about us identifying with those who are broken in this world. Will we get there or not? Now, I ask you to mark up your sheets. There's a reason I did. Not only does it help you see the pattern, love, do, give, but it actually helps you to see what is not underlined. Look back at your sheet. In the middle of that section where it's not underlined, there's one sentence. Do you see it? Now, I know there's brackets and there's squiggly lines. You've got to really look for it, but there's one sentence. It's one verse. Verse 31. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Do you recognize that? What is it? It's the golden rule. Stuck in the middle of his love, do, give is the golden rule. Why? Because if you don't get this, if you don't see this, he told you you're going to have to really hear. You're going to have to really lean in. You're going to really have to listen. The reason why this is so important to Jesus is because if you don't identify with the needs of people around you, oh, I would like to be treated better than I'm treating that person right now, so I need to identify in their need. Because there are days when I'm the dog, right? Are there days where you're barking? You ever have barking days? Where you're barking, and you may bark at the neighbor, you may bark at a friend. No, if you have children, you're barking at your children. If you have a spouse, maybe you're barking at your spouse, or you're barking at your boss. Maybe you don't bark directly to your boss because you want to keep your job, but you're barking to your employee, to the co-workers, right? There are days where we're at our worst. And in those moments when the worst comes out in others, we're supposed to have the compassion to realize that they're having a bad day. And I sure would like to have some mercy when that is me. He wants us to have that attitude. That's why, by the way, he begins by talking about attitude. The only section we haven't talked about is that very first part. We always skip that first part because we don't like it. Yet Jesus in this sermon and on the Sermon on the Mount has a section right at the beginning. They're both very poetic sections, and they both have to do with the attitude. Look at it again. Here's what it says. Looking at his disciples, he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject you, or your name as evil because of the Son of Man." So he says to us, you need to be poor, hungry, sad, and rejected if you're going to really identify with the poor, hungry, sad, and rejected people that have had a lot done to them, a lot of choices they have made, a lot of that the world has done to them. There's a lot of injustice done. There's a lot of bad news that comes their way. There's a season that most people go through of just poverty. If we could somehow identify with them, we would somehow be able to have compassion towards them, even those who are our enemies, those we don't want to do anything good for, we don't want to give to. He says, but if you would start here. The reason we skip this is because it's hard to see until you see the bigger picture. But this is about attitude. Doesn't mean you literally have to give away all your money and go hungry and find a situation that you can cry over and experience rejection. Not necessarily. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he actually puts it this way. Listen closely. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That's inside. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed, that's sadness, right? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. That's inside. He's talking about attitudes. In fact, we call them the Beatitudes. But when we get to the list here in Luke, Jesus is a little more direct. That's why these are two different sermons. They're on two different places. Jesus is emphasizing two different things. But they're really saying the same thing if you think about it, because the attitude leads to the action, which leads to you giving of yourself. And if you would recognize that you are to have the same attitude of Christ, do you have to go through a season of being poor? It sure would help for you to identify with those who are poor. Do you have to be hungry? It sure would help for you to have compassion for the hungry. Do you have to go through extreme sadness to have compassion? It would help. being injustice done to you would help, but you don't have to if you change your attitude and say, I don't have to have my way. I don't have to have all stuff and things that I want. I don't have to be comfortable. I can live a moderate life. I don't have to be the one who always gets their way. I don't have to be happy all the time. I can identify in the pain and the struggle when I start to change my attitude. And if I would change my attitude, if I would change my attitude towards those who are poor and hungry and sad and rejected, I might just, once in a while, say a kind word to them. Jesus Christ loved us even while we were enemies of God. He loved us so much that he did something about it. He stepped off the throne of heaven and was born to be like us and grow up among us. And then he gave everything he had on the cross. Dying, giving his blood for our salvation, to save us from our own sin. He desperately wants us to have this kind of heart that he has, that is willing to do and to give generously to those around us, even those who have wronged us. If you don't have a relationship with a God like this, who would do everything for you, including die, I want to invite you to this relationship. It's as simple as you just stepping out of your row, coming and meeting me here while the worship team sings. I invite you to receive the love and the mercy and the compassion of Christ. He has identified in every pain you have been through. He was born to a poor couple. There were times where he was terribly hungry. He wept bitterly, not only the loss of a friend, but over all of Jerusalem, knowing their spiritual loss. And he was rejected and nailed to a cross. He knows. And that's why he loves you so much. He knows whatever you're going through. He knows your struggle. He knows your pain. He wants so desperately for you to just come to him now. And so I invite you to come. I'm going to ask that you stand. We're going to pray, and then you come. Father God, I don't get moved enough by it, but I should. Just the thought of your suffering. Jesus Christ, you suffered in ways that I can't imagine. And you willingly chose to do it so that you could identify in us completely. You know my hurt. You know my pain. You know my weakness. You know my frailty. You know me. And you know every single person here and what they're going through. And you love them. You love them like crazy. Thank you. Will you now draw them? If they don't have a relationship with you, just let them know they need to step forward. Give them that peace and that courage, the courage of a lion to step forward. Thank you for loving them enough to save them. We do this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you have a decision, this is your time. Come.